Salam and welcome to another TMV podcast brought to you by the Muslim Vibe. As always, I'm your host Salim Qasim, and this week is we recorded an intro for this already, and then I looked back and I realized that this is the 100th episode of the Muslim Vibe podcast.
Woohoo!
That wasn't a sound effect. I do have a co-host for this podcast. Noura is joining me. Noura is our social media manager. Started working like the week before lockdown.
Started working at the start of coronavirus.
At the start of coronavirus, came all the way from America to a very strange landscape in the UK.
It's been interesting, yeah, for sure.
Before we come.
But how does it feel for you, Salim? This is your 100th episode.
I know, this is what I was gonna say. Like, we should take a moment. It's kind of crazy. Like, we started the podcast like 3 or so years ago, and it started off quite basic. If you listen back to like the first few episodes, it was just us in the office chatting about current affairs and what's going on in the world, and then slowly we started getting guests on and talking about wider issues, and we've had like so many random amazing people on this podcast.
Do you have any favorites? Any favorite episodes?
That's a tough one.
Or one that like really sticks out to you from the 100 that you've done?
The recent podcast with Ibn Ali Miller for me was a highlight. The podcast that we did with Atif Nawaz and Ali Official about their show Muslimics, I really enjoyed that conversation. The two guys were really great company as well. We've had a couple of MPs on the podcast as well, members of parliament in the UK. Feel free to listen back. Every podcast episode that we've done has like brought something very unique and educated myself on like an entirely different perspective, and that's what I love about doing the podcast generally. It's just I get to have these amazing conversations with really interesting individuals, and I learned so much. And it's been fun. Like I think it's I hope people have enjoyed it. I mean, I can obviously see the number of listeners generally, and alhamdulillah, that's been growing constantly, and we have like a decent sized kind of following now. And it's good because I feel like, you know, being able to facilitate a space for these kind of conversations is really important. It's part of why we wanted to start the Muslim Vibe. And
you guys talk about some controversial things.
Really?
In the podcast, yeah.
Really?
I'm not gonna name any, but there have been some controversial ones.
I think it is what it is, really. To be honest, I almost feel like we're taking away from this particular podcast because this podcast in itself is, for me, like one of the most exciting episodes that we've done. Bit of background, so you'll have seen from the title that we're talking about the late great Muhammad Ali, and we're talking about him with his daughter, Hana, and that in itself is a bit surreal. Like everyone that I've mentioned that I'm interviewing Hana about her father was just like, wow, like this is crazy. So this is also why you joined us on the podcast.
Yes, this is my first ever podcast, and I don't think any other one can top this.
Probably not.
I've set the standards pretty high after this.
So Hana got in touch with us a couple of weeks ago with an audio recording of her father reciting Surah Fatiha in English from like the 1970s, I think it was. And she wanted to share that out, so we put that out on video, and then I took the opportunity to also ask her if she'd be down to do a podcast and have a chat. And it just so happens that she's just completed writing a book entitled At Home with Muhammad Ali. And in that, she gives a very personal and intimate account of her father and of her life growing up with him. And she kind of tells multiple stories within that. And it's all based off of recordings that her father left her, over 90 hours of recordings. And it's, I really enjoyed
And
it.
it's not just like, it's recordings of him just like living his daily life, basically.
Being a dad.
Yeah, being a dad,
Yeah,
and just being him. And that's what's so nice about it, is that she quotes them word for word. And and like you said, you read it in his voice, and it's an experience, and it's a journey to read that book.
And it was great as well to be able to get some insights and hear some stories that I had never heard before about Muhammad Ali, and I'm sure there's dozens more. But what's interesting is that she made the point that even though she's said so much about him and there's so much more to be said, it all kind of comes back to and reflects everything that we've already seen. And I'm not gonna kind of, I guess, spoil it in terms of the interview that we have, but there are certain attributes of his that just come out in everything that he does and everything that he said. And it was really nice to be able to have that conversation.
And she generously shares her father with the world, I think, and that's, for me, that's insane. Like, having his daughter share him on this level, and even on the podcast, she says some things that are personal and things like that. So it's nice to have that connection with Muhammad Ali.
Yeah, and I think that's probably as much of an intro as we can give it before we get underway, especially for our long time listeners. Considering this is our 100th episode, if you haven't already, please do consider subscribing. Yeah, well, obviously subscribing to the podcast, but also supporting us.
Support the TMV podcast.
Support the TMV podcast, support TMV generally. The link will be in the description. It would be great if we can get people on just £10 a month to be able to help us continue to do this. We want to grow the team. We have ambitions. I talk about this every time, but I'm hoping the fact this is the 100th episode, and it's a fantastic episode as well, that you guys will really consider digging deep and helping to support the work that we do. That's it. Without further ado, here's our conversation with Hana Ali, talking about her late great father, Muhammad Ali. So, assalamu alaikum, Hana.
Walaikum salam.
Thank you very much for joining us on the podcast. This is kind of a little bit surreal for myself, and I think it would be for most people, just because of what your father, I think, means to everyone. So thank you again for joining us. It's a real pleasure, and for getting in touch with us. So I guess for a bit of background context, and I think it kind of leads into talking about your book and everything else, but you shared an audio clip with us of your father reciting Surah Al-Fatiha in English from like 1970 something. I can't remember the exact year.
79.
79, and these were tapes that you had and your dad gave to you, I guess years ago, and that you kind of are now sharing out, and your book as well. You share tapes of your father, and you mentioned, I think, that there's over 90 hours of recordings that he kind of left you in his lifetime. The first thing I wanted to just comment on and say is that even reading the first clip, I'm not going to try and do an American accent. But your father says, this is Muhammad Ali at 55 Fremont Place, January the 5th, 1980. The time is 11 a.m. in Los Angeles. I'm chasing Hana and Layla. When I read that, I could actually hear it in his voice. It's the strangest thing. It sounded like I'd already heard the audio recording,
right,
just reading the script. And I think he had such a kind of unique and distinct voice. But the first question, I could keep talking. I don't actually need you to say anything back, but I think it's probably best. It's probably best that I do bring you in. So the first question, I guess, is that, you know, to some, your father was the greatest boxer who ever lived. To others, you know, one of the most charismatic men and I guess activists as well in recent history. But I guess the question to you is, how do you remember your father?
Well, thank you for having me, first of all. And I have to say that, you know, my father lived his life like an open book. And what you saw in the world is, I would say, 99% of who he was at home. The only difference is he was a little more calm. He was a homebody. He loved to be at home. He loved having company. I'm talking about just random people. We would drive down the streets and I mean, there could be a homeless man walking, and he would put him in the back of our car, ask if he needed a ride. I'm not kidding. we were going to eat at the time on Wilshire Boulevard in Los Angeles. His favorite restaurants were Carnation and Bob's Big Boy. They were just so close. He liked diners. And he would just eat with people, talk with people. Even in the later years, my father moved with the Parkinson's and we were going out to eat. He loved interacting. He would go and stand and walk around each table and just pass out his autograph before people would even ask for it. But the key is he'd pass them out on Islamic pamphlets. Introduction to Islam. What is Islam? Is Jesus really God? Anything he could to help spread the word of Islam. And he knew that people, he would say to me, the people, if I sign this and put my autograph on it, they'll keep it. And one day they'll pick it up and they'll read about it. And so he dedicated his life to that. So what I remember about my father, I think more than anything, and it will never leave me, is just his humanity. I think it was his greatest gift to the world. He loved people, genuinely loved people. He loved being Muhammad Ali. He loved giving himself his time. He used to joke and say to me, I'm not your daddy, Hana, just your father. I'm also the daddy of the world. People look up to me and it's my job to lead them right and to do right and to continue to be a role model for these people. So he really believed in his life's purpose from God. And he believed so strongly in Allah and God and his mission here. And he believed that God was his bodyguard. It's why he had, I think, so much courage to walk around the streets so openly. No literal bodyguards. I mean, the bodyguards he had didn't really actually guard him. There was no barrier between my father and the people in the streets. You could walk up to him and touch him and he would hug and love you right back anywhere he went. There's countless videos on YouTube where you'll see him walking in Miami Beach or wherever, and the people are honking the horns at him and he's giving them the victory fist and they're walking up to him and walking with him and he's hugging them and signing autographs. He just loved being accessible and he loved touching people and inspiring them. And he made his life's mission to spread the truth about his religion, which he felt saved him in the world and gave him purpose that he loved so dearly.
We were just discussing this. Salam Hana, this is Nora, Salim's co-host for this podcast. Really happy to have you on. But we were just discussing this right before the podcast. I was telling Salim is that Muhammad Ali seemed like a person who loved being loved, basically. And there's a lot of moments in your book where you talk about how he is at home. He's so playful with everyone within the household, playful with you and your sister and your other siblings as well. And he also used that playfulness to kind of project his views, his worldly views, when it came to the media as well.
Yes.
It's interesting that the quote. So I was just about to say that the quote that you just said, we actually wrote that one down from your book, where you say Hana, where he says, Hana, I'm your daddy, but I'm also Muhammad Ali, the champion of the world. People look up to me, I inspire them, so I have to go to Deer Lake, and he's talking about training for a fight. But I think, like, on a personal level for yourself, that must have been quite difficult as a child to have to share your father with people, no?
Well, yeah, when I was 5, and I didn't understand it. But my father always sat us down and talked about the important, deep things in the world. I mean, even when we were too young to understand it. I mean, he would sit us down and talk about how we had an angel on our left and our shoulder and one on our right shoulder, and one's taking all the good deeds and one's taking all the bad deeds. And when we died and went to heaven, God's going to play it back to us like a movie, our life, so you better do good. He would talk about how sleep was the cousin of death, and, and this life could be over any time. And one day he was going to die, and one day my mom was going to die, and we're all going to die. And what matters is what we do in the moments that we're given on this earth. And I mean, we were too young at the time to appreciate and understand. If anything, it instilled fear. And I wouldn't sleep for a long time, I remember. But he was trying to teach us and educate us and teach us about how we, you come into the world and you learn more than anything else through watching how your parents interact with people, how they live their lives, all of that. We're learning, subconsciously. And my father wanted us to be charitable, give to charity, to be humble, to know that no matter how, he would say that the world's going to treat us better because our father is Muhammad Ali and we might have an easier life. We don't have to work as hard for money, all of these things. But you have to remember that you're no better than anybody else. Nothing makes you greater than another person except for your heart, how good your heart is, how much you give to charity, how much you give back and do good for God. And that should be the purpose of your life, on top of whatever other purpose you should find in life, and to always be humble. And he worked at that, because people were always at his feet, wanting to serve him. And And he wanted to be humble, and he practiced and worked at being humble the same way someone might actually go and learn to become a doctor or a lawyer in school. So he was constantly reading about spiritual things, constantly trying to share the truth about a religion that's so misunderstood, that is so much of who he was, that people love. So it's just so ironic and interesting, the things that people that are non-Muslim respect and love about my father are things he came to the earth with, his spirit, that were God-given, but at the same time that he loved and practiced about his religion. So it broke his heart.
I think that for me as a Muslim, I recognize that about him, and that's the personality I see when I think about Muhammad Ali, is that he used Islam, and he tried to use it in a way that kind of resonated with people, and with people who didn't truly understand what Islam was at the time, and it was a scary thing. But do you feel like in this book that you've written, that you've shared more of your father than what was already known about him, or already felt about him?
Definitely. Because most books about my father talk and focus on the boxing, and I even get some, I always like to go read the Goodreads reviews and reply to people, and I get a lot of comments sometimes that people let them know, this is book, either it's, this takes you into, I felt like I was in the house with him, I felt like I learned more about him, or I'm not really, this is not teaching you about the boxing. And it's a memoir to teach people, I think to share, because my
he's
father,
more than a boxer.
Not just that,
the guy in the ring,
but to really give something to the legacy that's left, to show you the human being of who he really was at home, around the house, and every day. Because I took for granted that the world knows this because he's so world famous and loved, but they don't, because the questions they ask me, I get more than anything else. I would always get, how was he at home? What kind of dad was he? And we take for granted sometimes because we live it and we see it. And I assume that all these people that I always see praising and loving him really knew everything about him. But really what they're seeing are the stands he took in history, how great of a boxer he was, that he seemed to be a generous and nice guy, down to earth, and he's funny. But I said, let me show them, as much as I can provide, let's show him my father through our eyes as a family.
Which you did very nicely, by the way. I started reading a couple of days ago, and a small thing is talking about how he was an extremely patient person, but he wasn't great at being patient when waiting for his food or things like that, which I found so funny and so sweet.
He's hilarious. Daddy was funny because you could see the antsiness in him. And what's so funny too is that he didn't have any pretenses, in the sense where, you arrive someplace and have to enter the room he loved to arrive everywhere early. And I'm not kidding you when I said he was waiting for his fans, eager to meet his fans before they even, arrived at the house. My father was so funny.
I was literally telling Ahmed, I was like, you read it and you fall in love with him more. Like the recording of when he's calling people randomly in Christmas and just wishing them Merry Christmas.
So I guess for people that don't know that story, your father used to call random phone numbers at Christmas to wish people Merry Christmas from Muhammad Ali.
Right. Not even just Christmas. Like, he would sometimes just dial a random number in his head, 5562-771, whatever, and say, how you doing? How's life going? He loved to shock and amaze people. He loved
Did anyone ever say, sorry, I don't know who you are?
No, are you kidding me? They hung up on him a lot.
That's the thing.
So I had to call back. And I would call back. This is even later in life when it was harder for him to speak. Any fan that would leave their number, he always called it. If he received fan mail, we would spend hours going through fan mail. And it was hard for him to speak and for him to understand him. So he get hung up on a lot. So I would say, hi, this is Hana Ali. My father and I just opened your letter. My dad wanted to call because you left your number. So I just wanted to, translate a little if you don't understand what he's saying clearly over the phone. So you didn't think it was a crank call. Wow. So my father, I'm not kidding.
What kind of responses would you get to that?
Oh my God, Muhammad Ali's on the phone. Or, are you kidding me? Is this a joke? Or, Sarah, is this you pranking me again? Or it was just random stuff. Funny. And some people would be just as down to earth as him. But hey, what's up? Let me talk to Muhammad, So you would think they were friends.
Yeah, wow.
But my dad he thought that there was no way that he could have a gift this huge to get all the love and adulation he would receive from people, to know that one smile, one hello, one return call, one handshake, giving someone 100% of eye contact, any little bit that he could give back. And he knew what that could do for their spirit in life. So he took he knew he had a tremendous responsibility. He used to say there's responsibilities that come with fame. You can't just get all these blessings and have this power, this influence that you can help so many people. and not use it for good. And he took it to the to the point to where he would be tired, even when he couldn't walk or talk as easily, he'd still pull over, and he would just then take hours. He would spend hours at home pre-signing his Islamic pamphlets to hand out, because he knew that he couldn't sign quick enough to get everyone in the crowd. So, I mean, at home,
Wow.
he was watching old videos on himself, because I used to joke he's his biggest fan. He loved watching himself, especially I think later in life, because you look back and see how fast and quick he was. And you say, look, that's how great God is. Now all that's gone. The speed is gone. It's hard to talk. It's all part of life. And it made him, I think, more loved, more human. And he never questioned. He never said, why me? I'm not kidding you. When I say he never complained. He never even, and no one has even heard my father say, I have a headache. And I'm trying to explain just how big that is, because he never complained about anything. He passed kidney stones without complaining. It's like not even saying, ouch, you're making a face. I'm not kidding you. So it's like Daddy just had this amazing tolerance.
If anyone deserved to complain, it would be him, especially with the things that he's been through. That's crazy.
He knew that it was all part of God's plan for his purpose on this earth. He wouldn't be as great, as respected or loved if he didn't go through the hell he did with the war and not going to the Vietnam and taking that stance. So he knew that, he knew that it was all part of what made him who he is. So he had the knowledge spiritually to understand that. And he just came to the earth that way. When people have a purpose that big, Dad used to always say that, I wouldn't put anything burden on any man that he couldn't handle. So
I was gonna say that, like, so our office right now is quite hot and there's no air conditioning, and Nora has been complaining all day about the heat. So I think the response to her basically is, think of Muhammad Ali. He didn't complain.
Muhammad Ali didn't wear a hijab.
He doesn't know the struggle.
No.
What I did want to ask you though is like I mentioned your father's charisma. And for me personally, growing up, there was something so magnetic, like his various interviews with Parkinson. And my dad, actually, I told my dad that I was going to be speaking to you, and he was like, make sure you tell her that, we used to love watching her dad grow up when we were growing up. And like his interviews that he was doing on TV with, was it Richard Park? I can't remember the guy's name. Parkinson, the British.
Yes.
Laura's looking at me blank.
Those are our favorite.
But yeah, so those interviews, my dad was telling me that he would basically, like, his whole family would get, or like my family would all come around together, and that was like the highlight. And he did a couple of those, and there was something, and even watching them back now, like, you can enjoy every second of it because he just had like charisma oozing out of him.
My God,
I think
yes.
that's what was kind of magnetic for so many people. But I think people have taken so many different things from him, either, with the activism you talked about just now, about the whole anti-war stance that he took, be it his determination and his speed and his self-confidence. But what would you say is, for yourself, the biggest thing that you've gained from your father, living with him, seeing him up close and personal?
I think,
like, what has been your big takeaway?
Humanity, just how to be a decent human being and to care about people. The smallest little things. I mean, you don't know what people are dealing with. That's the greatest lesson. There's nothing better than that. Just to have a good, open heart, to be down to earth and humble, and his spiritual faith more than anything else. It's that, the heart and his faith. So I get through life, and I don't stay mad at people. I forgive easy. If they're sorry, I even forgive when they're not. People are human beings. We're all here trying to learn. One of the beautiful things about my father is, like you said, not just his charisma, but that made it possible for him to talk about these topics, religion, whatever else, and do it in a way where he didn't get offended by people. He would stand up, express, and he could do it in a colorful way. And if the conversation got too serious or someone was feeling funny, he had a great sense of humor. He knew how to make a joke and just make it calm and just bring it back to a pleasant pace and still get these important details and messages out. And it also made it more receptive from people. God knew what he was doing when he created him, so it's like,
even in that video, there's like a viral video of him, that clip of when he talks about how everything is white and like how everything that's black is bad, basically, but he does it with humor. The whole audience is laughing, but what he's saying is really serious and really really messed up. But
exactly, so he knew how to deliver a message in the right way. And not only that, people that don't live it would not know or think about it, because they're subtle but profound messages. And when you have someone bring it to your attention, it's like an aha moment. A light bulb goes on, like, oh my God, that's true. So there's so much more that you'll never understand just what black males go through, not even black women go through it, is bad. I have a dark-skinned husband who has this like fighter look. So, I mean, he's harassed where he's just trying to come home because we live in a predominantly white area. You know, he's pulled over. Oh, can I see your ID? Where are you going, sir? No good reason. No tail lights out. Nothing's wrong with the license plate. So, I didn't even understand and see how much that they go through it until I was with a dark-skinned black man, bald-headed, dark-skinned black man, and get married him. And we start, so, I mean, it's serious. So I think that, but my dad, it was in a time when it was much worse. You were just getting hung from trees, walking home at night. Your houses are getting bombed. You're getting harassed, messed with. When he was 4 years old trying to go home with his mother, they wouldn't even let him in to get a drink of water. I mean, it was 10 times worse. You see, people just have no idea that are not black. And
so,
yeah.
I think it's probably a good time to talk about, I guess, contemporary issues a little bit, because you're talking about a lot of the stances that your father took back in the day, and a lot of them were very kind of controversial and political. And the experience that you discussed or you expressed just now with your own husband being stopped by police and pulled over just for being in a white neighborhood. I think a lot of people are looking back, and even nowadays people are quoting Malcolm X very frequently because of everything that's happening with the Black Lives Matter movement. And we like to always think back to the greats like your father and wonder what his stance would be on a movement like the Black Lives Matter movement.
Well, see, my father knew, just like people that live, like I said today, that these things have not changed. So first, slaves were freed, but then it took some time before they knew they were free. Then they replaced slavery with Jim Crow, and then you have the KKK, and now the KKK. Things that were being, people were committing murders and atrocities to black females, kids, males all the time in broad daylight with witnesses and getting let off. And now they have police badges. They always have. So they continue the injustice. My father would be for any movement. He would definitely support Black Lives Matter movement. You have so many people that are uneducated or ignorant thinking that Black Lives Matter means that other lives don't, when it has nothing to do with that. Their issue is really Black Lives Matter also, or Black Lives Matter too, which is an invisible too, an invisible also, because Black lives are the ones that have been disrespected. Anyone of color, from the history of white America and the systemic racism has been in place for a long time. Think about it. All the Black Panthers that were taking up arms just to defend themselves, not to cause any havoc, were considered communist or a threat to the United States. But what about the KKK to this day? They're openly hateful, and they're the ones that are causing infliction on innocent people, hatred. And they're it's okay for them to congregate. It's okay for them to express this hate. Never, it's really sad, but that's just an example of the systemic racism. They're not a threat to white America. They're a threat to the darker people who they already don't have respect for our lives anyway. So my father would definitely support the movement. He would be the Muhammad Ali of old if he could talk and was alive now. And just speaking up for Black pride, Black issues, and issues for all people around the world who are mistreated. Muslims that are mistreated because of their religion, Black people, Hispanics, Indians, whoever, any movement that's supported non-violently and in a positive way, try to bring about some positive change, my father would support, especially for his own people. The only thing I would say is this: it's, even when you talk about get into the rioting and things like that, I think my father would even say to that, of course, it's not good to still plummet, but you have to understand why people get to that point. The ones that are just frustrated. You're not listening to the Colin Kaepernicks who are peacefully kneeling. You're taking away his livelihood and his job for taking a stance peacefully. You don't listen. Change doesn't come about until they get scared and they start realizing, stop doing it to our own neighborhoods. We're going to come to the Beverly Hills area where the white people live, where the people that are a part of the problem are. And that's when the change happens. Oh, we can't have them coming over here. So sadly, I see why they feel they need to resort to that. Aside from the people, that are taking advantage, just out there just stealing things. I can see, I don't condone or think that's the way to go, but I understand why it gets to that. You roar, you scream, you're so angry. You can't get these lives back that are taken. It's like enough is
I
enough.
feel like it's also quite bizarre,
Right.
or just quite bewildering, I guess, that despite the fact that it's been in some cases 30 years, 40 years since your father's done certain interviews, those same audio clips are being used today to prove the point of what's happening in society. Do you know what I mean? Like a lot of the same ills of society still exist.
Right.
And the fact that a lot of his messages are still kind of relevant today just shows how little we've progressed.
Well, you know why? Because it's going to take, my father used to always say, it has to start with the children. The minds of adults are already been poisoned. They're already conditioned to think they're better, greater. You're born into a world, like he said, where Jesus Christ was painted with blue eyes and blonde hair. So you already think that you look like God subconsciously. You know what I mean? So, obviously, as you know, in Islam, you don't have pictures and portraits of angels and whatnot. In Christianity, they want to give them a race. And of course, they made them all white with blonde hair and blue eyes, the furthest away from any person of color, so. But I think that, so you're taught it subconsciously already in school. You're from a kid, as children, they see the world, they see that they have privilege, and that they're taught to think that they're better than. Yeah. So I think that my father knew that, Malcolm X knew that, and that's what they were trying to show and teach, because why would people in white America ever try to learn this, think this? They teach the history incorrectly. So in that it's probably difficult to look at your ancestors and have that shame that has to come about when you see what they've done to all people of color all over the world. So I think that what's important is that now, because this is such a loud roar, the earth is shaking, it's being shook up. My father would say they're shaking up the world, is how he would put it.
I shook up the world.
Yeah, and they're shaking up the world with this rioting and everything else they're doing to make you listen. You have to pay attention. You have to now look at what's going on, and change is coming for all people. So I think that are on the downside of advantage or mistreated, whether you're tan, yellow, brown, whatever, so we're just the face of the movement because we've had it the worst. And it's been overlooked for so long. So now all of these old videos of people that were trying to teach and tell you and spread in a time when they still didn't respect and have my father was doing this in a time when he couldn't even eat in certain restaurants still. So these laws have changed, but the way that people believe and think and treat you or fear you have not changed. So I think that's why it has to start with children. It's how you start teaching your children to view people and to treat them with respect. And that's when the change comes, when generations are born into new. So we're still too close to when it was okay to do these things and get away with it. Not even a lifetime away for it to be completely gone. It'd be insane for anyone to think that. It's not going to be cured that soon. It's going to take some time.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's sad, I guess, that it's taken this long. And as you say, like, it does start with the children, but I feel like at least what I'm seeing on social media is that there are still clear divides, and that people are kind of still teaching their children all the negativity that's within them, and then that's just passing on, and generations are kind of growing and developing. Right. I wanted to quickly come back to your book. So this book is obviously based on so it's At Home with Muhammad Ali is the title of the book, and it's based on the voice recordings that your father left you, over 90 hours worth, which is in its own way very amazing that he kind of had the foresight to put this all down. And like the way, as I said, number one, I can hear his voice throughout, but the way that he kind of documented every small incident, and it's similar, I guess, to how we use our mobile phones today. We're taking video clips and pictures and whatever, and he just did that in his own kind of way that was accessible at the time. What was the experience like for you writing this book in contrast to previous books that you've written? Because I believe you've written one, you've co-authored one with your father, right? His autobiography.
Yeah, this is my fourth book.
So how was this one different for you?
So like you just said, my dad was ahead of his time. I always said that he is the world's first reality show. He respected and appreciated the beautiful moments in life that were just passing by, and he wanted to capture that. So writing this book was a lot more challenging because it's a memoir. So I'm telling 3 stories. It started off as just being a book that I called Conversations with the Greatest, and I was just going to transcribe the recordings because he's so colorful and entertaining that they could have just told his own story in a different kind of way for history. And then that changed, And the publisher said, why don't you put, a little explanation before and after it? So then I thought, oh, good idea. So then I introduced the recordings, what was going on in the world, and it just became the recordings transcribed with just an introduction of what was going on around them. And then that changed. I thought, well, maybe I should give my sisters a chapter each for all their memories. So I collected their memories, and then mine were too top heavy. They didn't grow up or spend as much time with him. So it was a little harder to do it that way. So then I just decided somehow to do a memoir, and I wrote the book myself. So I had to read a lot of how-to books for memoir writing because it was so challenging, mainly because I then discovered my love letters that my father wrote to my mother that she never knew about when we were in storage. So it kept metamorphosing and growing, and it became At Home with Muhammad Ali, a memoir of love, loss, and forgiveness. And I'm telling 3 stories. So it was a challenge to have to go back and visit the pain of my parents' divorce. I'm telling my mother's story with my father, her side of it, telling my father's story about what he was doing in the time before Parkinson's was just coming at the end of his boxing career, all the things he was dealing with, because, he recorded them. So he wanted them to be shared. He knew, how important life was, and he's a human being, and he had just the same stresses that most people do. So you get to see that. It humanizes him some more, I think, for his fans, and know what he was going through, what he was dealing with.
I was reading some yesterday, and I just got up and I had to take a deep breath and be like, Sadim, this book is really emotional.
Oh,
because I feel like you write it in a way where we're taking that journey with you. We're in that storage room with you, and we're there when your mom finds those letters.
Yeah.
And then you take us back to the past. There's flashbacks back to the past, and then your little Hana, and and you hear, like Sanim said, you hear his voice for some reason.
Right.
When I read it, I can hear his voice in my head.
Thank you. So I'm glad you say that.
Thank you. Very well written.
Thank you.
Very nicely written.
Thank you, because that was my goal. I wanted people. My father was so down to earth and so accessible that I wanted the book to feel that way. I wanted it to be authentic. I wanted them to feel like they were there with me in the journey, and I wanted to share him as much as I could, candidly as possible, and do it creatively enough to keep it interesting, not bore anyone on one topic. And I had to find a way to be able to tell these 3 stories, my own, my mother and parents as a couple, my parents and my father's individually, and do it in a way that just really got the message across, and so the recordings were such a blessing, because then it could bring it to life and in his own words, and show, not tell. I'm telling you how wonderful he is, but you get to see it through just the way he was naturally on his own. So it was a big challenge. It was very, very emotional. I read, like I said, a lot of how-to books on how to do a memoir, and I learned how, because I wanted to tell the stories I did before, the books I did before were just sort of like an essay form, so it wasn't like cohesively telling a story. And I thought, well, I have to tell, it's a memoir, so I have to include myself and my perspective, and then also I wanted to take the reader on the journey that I went through, so discovering them. So I thought, well, how can I do this in a way where it's able to creatively do it? And that's why I decided, okay, I'll do it how it happened. I went to the storage, I brought the stuff home. This is how it happened. And I'll go back and I'll use flashbacks, and I'll incorporate important things I want to share. And that way, the people that are looking to find out some things about fights, there's a little bit of that in there, because it was part of our life. It's just the last fights of his life, of course. They get to get the George Foreman stuff just a little bit, because that's when my parents met, so
that's what the people want as well, right?
Yeah, they have a little bit of that too, but the title, I try to show people what they're going to get in the title. You're at home with Muhammad Ali.
No,
right.
I think sorry to cut you off,
no,
but I feel like for myself, coming into the book, obviously I knew it was you writing about at home with your father, but I wasn't quite ready for the I guess the level of intimacy that and the exposure that we get to Muhammad Ali, because obviously I've watched the Will Smith film, I've watched the documentaries, I've watched the fights, I've watched the interviews, and that's like the public facing stuff that you see, and obviously you get like little clips and you'll see pictures of the family, and you'll hear about Layla as well, your sister, who's a boxer, and I'm going to ask you soon actually why you didn't get into boxing, but we can come to that in a second. But it was really fascinating, and I think for a lot of people like myself who have always seen your dad as someone inspirational, and just this incredible figure, to get such a different perspective on him, and to kind of humanize him and bring him back down to earth a little bit, but in a good way, because it just fleshes out, and it's like well, I guess when you see anyone, like any of your favorite kind of TV stars or movie stars or whatever it is that people look up to, like when you're able to spend time with that person and you see like the entire picture, it just kind of makes it a lot more real and wholesome. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does, because I've read so much. I mean, there's more. He's the most written about person in the world. I saw something about Oprah. When he was promoting the Ali film on Oprah, she was doing her research and she had said that. And I remember in the introduction, I was going to write that, but I had it written wrong. I said that to my publisher at the time, she was like, no, it's a different book. He's not the most written. There's more books written about, she named certain presidents. And I had it wrong because there's not more books written about him than anyone else, but he's the most written about. So that includes articles and everything else. Person in history. And with all of that, I still haven't found any one thing that really encapsulates the true essence of who a person is, which is my father's heart, his soul, and his spirit. And that's why I wanted to write the book that way, because so many times in life I hear, especially young, growing up, you don't know how wonderful your dad is. And I'm like, no, I do. You don't know how wonderful my dad is.
You don't know.
I know exactly how wonderful my dad is. I get to see him 24/7 at home and out the spotlight in the little things he didn't promote, because he believed that promoting certain things were negative, because then you get adulation and praise for doing it. And that's not truly giving. So he just was such an amazing human being to such a level that just is unheard of. So forget about, it's just extra extraordinary because he was a famous, wealthy human being, but just as a human being, the fact that he loved people so much, cared so much about humanity, bringing homeless people home because he felt it was a sin for us to have so many rooms empty, so if you don't let him pass a group of homeless people, he would just pile them up and I'm not kidding, bring them home. And feed them.
I think it's amazing. It's amazing that despite everything that we look up to in your father, that for you, it's his humanity that stands out. And we spoke, and you mentioned like his faith and the fact that he would write his signature on napkins that had like Islamic literature, in the hope that someone would kind of revisit that. So I guess tell me more about his faith, because I think we've seen it, and in interviews, he doesn't hold back from talking about God and about death and about life and everything from like a very Muslim perspective. But what was that like for you growing up? You said that obviously he would, preach to you on the border of scaring, bordering on scaring you.
I used to worry about my father, someone shooting or hurting him. The more I learned, and I knew then in life, it's almost like I got a stronger sense of faith through watching him. It's crazy.
Watching his faith.
I knew before I understood the concept of God that there had to be a God. Just watching my father. I mean, for him to have survived the 60s, the people, all of our leaders were shot and dead, killed. I mean, Medgar Evers, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, like just constantly people that we never even know their names of. Different leaders of the Black Panther movement were murdered. People were murdered, and he would walk the streets everywhere, accessible everywhere, in big crowds. So my father used to say that God, Allah, is his bodyguard, and that if some man wants to get him, no other man on this earth can protect him, only God. So that if he's supposed to survive, if he's supposed to make this walk and live, take this march and live, survive anything in life, it's because God, it's his plan for him. So that's what he went on. He didn't want to live in fear. And he couldn't live not having people be able to approach him. He needed people like he needed air to breathe. He loved them. And I think they rejuvenated him and gave him strength and energy. So he needed to have that contact, just like you charge a battery. He needed people. Yeah. So
you can see that. You can see that love that he has for God, and everything he does, he emulates it. You can see his love and his faith in everything that he does. Whereas like I think like characters like MLK and Malcolm X, they're respected, and for some people they're feared, but for Muhammad Ali it was love, and it was people loved him, people weren't afraid of him, people respected him as well. But there was a lot of love when Muhammad Ali came on the screen, or when Muhammad Ali was boxing, or anything that involved Muhammad Ali was. And
I think you've probably. So I was just going to say quickly before you come in, you've probably heard from 1,000,001 people the impact that your father had on them. And I'm going to take this opportunity to do that for myself. But I think like growing up, especially kind of post 9/11, watching clips of your dad talking about Allah and about God being his bodyguard and no one can stop him. And he, having that strength of faith, is and was a very uplifting thing. Do you know what I mean? Like it's for a young, I was like 11, I think at the time, but like, in my early teens, growing up in a world where suddenly Muslims are hated, and you've got someone who everybody, be they Muslim or non-Muslim, loves this human being just because of his charisma, his boxing, you know, being literally the world's greatest and everything else. Like that for me was incredible, having that kind of person and that kind of aura there.
Right.
And showing me kind of how to live.
Right. My father knew that. So that's why he took every opportunity to do what he did and on camera. So what I was going to say before was, even after the George Foreman fight, they don't use this clip a lot. They cut it off. But after the George Foreman fight, and he's telling them, don't ever doubt me again or make me the underdog until I'm 50 years old. He goes on to say, I proved that Allah is God. So he always was trying to promote and spread his faith every chance he got.
Yeah.
So he you know, my dad knew that the world was watching. He knew that people looked up to him. That's why he used to say to me, I'm the daddy of the world. He saw himself as a teacher. That's why he was put here. And that's why I say that his humanity is the most important and the greatest lesson for all of humanity, even over his faith. Because sometimes in life, people have to come and they have to find their way through to faith, to come to faith and whatever else. But to be a human being, to treat people with kindness and respect is so difficult for people. You know, all the world wars and problems we have, and just not caring about people enough is the problem. Everyone wants to fight for their one cause. You know, God bless this country or that country. And my father would say, no, it's God bless the world. So I think that all people everywhere want to be treated right. They want to be treated with respect. People want to have the right to practice their faith, to love themselves, their you know, to be able to walk the streets peacefully and not be hated because of something a certain person did that belonged to this faith or this race or this belief, creed, whatever movement. You know, it's not right. And that's why his humanity is the greatest lesson that he could have taught us and the world and all people everywhere. He was such a decent, loving, caring, forgiving human being. He held no grudges, never spoke bad about people unless he's like being playful to promote a fight. You know, he had an amazing faith. And I think that when you come to life with a purpose that strong, he came to the earth that way spiritually, because on some level, subconsciously, he knew his mission, you know? So I think that that's the greatest lesson, really, his humanity.
So I was going to say, you're kind of talking into the mic a little bit. Have you changed the position?
Yeah, I did. Sorry. When the dogs start barking, I put
sorry.
the phone in. Here we go.
Oh, that's fine. That's fine. Sorry, go on. We'll jump back in.
Okay.
Hana, so your father is a role model to millions and millions of people throughout years and years. Does Muhammad Ali have any role models that you know of?
No. If he told you he had a role, he had someone he looked up to when he was younger, of course, as a kid, and that was Sugar Ray Robinson, for boxing purposes. He thought he was classy and well spoken, and that's who he looked up to as a child. But in his adult life, honestly, the only people that my father really looked up to were devout Muslims, imams, and he liked, you know, Elijah Muhammad, you know, people he felt were very spiritual, that he looked to for guidance in some way religiously, are people he looked up to. I wouldn't say a role model. He was an individual, followed his own heart beliefs. No one really affected him, you know? So, and if he didn't agree with one bit here or there that someone did or taught, he would just toss that aside and stick to the positive things. And he took the good and, you know, then made his own mind up in everything in life. It was who he was in all aspects and areas.
And with regards to how he was viewed, because we discussed it previously before we started recording, and you mentioned that the kind of perception of Muhammad Ali was so in my lifetime, it's always been, this is the world's greatest boxer and, you know, like one of the leading individuals in the world, basically. But I remember at the time of your father's passing, there was a lot more that was kind of brought up, and there are some documentaries as well that talk about the controversies, especially around the Vietnam War and the kind of statements that he made around that time. How do you think that impacted him? I know you as in you weren't born in 1967 yet.
No, I wasn't born in 76.
When all that stuff was going on.
Yeah. So my father, naturally,
like how did that all impact him? I guess is my question.
My father didn't really he never talked about that. He didn't, like I said, he didn't complain or talk about things. He wasn't one to hang his head and feel depressed or sad. He knew that everything in life had times and things would change. And he only received a lot of the love from people. Those are the ones that people were approaching him. And when he did receive the negativity, it wasn't that often. When he did, it was primarily in the 60s. And, he kept his head held high. So you think
after the 60s, everything was kind of smooth sailing in terms of like his public image and everything else?
Everything was not smooth sailing.
Not smooth sailing, I know.
No, what I mean is that naturally you had a lot of hateful people in that time. So they didn't he would tell you, a loud, outspoken Black man telling them about themselves, bringing light, shedding light, and being so cocky and proud, and Black is beautiful and love yourself. And that's what he was doing. He was trying to help Black people love themselves, when everything that they were taught was that Black was negative. That's why he got into the devil fruitcake was the chocolate and the angel was the white. And how they made Tarzan in the jungle of Africa white, and how everything good was associated white, and blackball from fraternity, black cats are bad luck. And he would have this whole speeches he would give, because he learned a lot of that from the Nation of Islam, and would spread that truth. But to bring a light and awareness to it, mainly for Black people watching, to see a beautiful Black man stand up and say, we're all beautiful, all of our shades and colors are beautiful, when you're taught to not love yourself. So he was teaching Black love and morale, and helping the morale of Black people around the world. And he was helping the morale of Muslims and people who are on the, whose religion was not respected and exploited and represented wrongly in the media and movies and films and press, so
he definitely didn't cater to his time, basically, because he's prideful of his color, and he's prideful of where he comes from, and he talks about Islam and stuff. So he really doesn't care about catering to the white people, who are the people who could at the time bring him down or bring him up, basically.
Right. And he would say
that's such a admirable thing about him.
Right, exactly. He'd give it all up because he knew that, but you have to have an understanding and not make material things your God, not make wealth the most important thing in life, to be able to do that like he did so courageously without a second thought. If you can't be free to worship how you want to live how you want to speak up, you're not going to he wasn't going to let them use him to lure other Black people or other people in general into the army and to fight and kill. My father was such a gentle, loving person. So it's so funny because he was a boxer, but he wasn't a fighter. He didn't try to hurt people. He was a boxer. There was an art to what he did. He danced in the ring. He used the rope-a-dope. He would lean off of people when they were looking like they were hurt. The only fight you probably would see there, he wasn't boxing, but fighting, was when it was, I think, Ernie Terrell. He would not respect him and say his name, Muhammad Ali. So I think that, my father was just such a true sense of a role model, and we just don't have them anymore. They can't diminish or bring down his legacy in any way. He lived
do you think so I'm really sorry to cut you off.
It's okay.
I do this a lot. I apologize.
It's okay.
But no, I was just thinking, do you think that because of the era that your father was born into, that he was able to be the individual that he was? What I mean by that is that today we have social media, and social media puts this like microscope on everybody and every statement, and I've discussed it previously on other episodes, where sometimes even you're not commenting. So for example, we take Black Lives Matter, we discussed earlier. If your father did comment, he would get heat for what he said. If he didn't comment, he would also catch the same heat. And I feel like news was kind of slower to spread back in the day compared to now, whereas right now there's this kind of very instant nature to things. Do you think he would have thrived in the same way had he been born into our era today?
Well, definitely, because back then you had the risk of getting shot and lynched for speaking the way you spoke. Much bigger deal than just losing your social media account. So, and not only that, he got that famous and got a message that wide with only 3 major channels. No social media. So if anything, he'd be huger now, but he was put in the time he was supposed to.
If that was even possible.
To fulfill his purpose. So there's nothing that would ever stop my father from speaking his mind, from spreading whatever truth he felt he needed to spread. That's who he was. It wouldn't change at any time. So God knows why he put him where he put him and for what reasons. It was, obviously. But if anything, everything was a bigger risk back in a time when Black folks were getting sniped off for walking down the street. Of course, the white America wasn't going to cover that all the time, but it was happening all the time. He's had a bomb go off in his New York apartment, my father. His phones were tapped probably all the way into the late 70s. they were so threatened by people who were nonviolent, which Black people weren't violent. They didn't go anywhere and try to dominate over any other people of the world like white America was doing. They weren't lynching and killing people. They're just trying to defend themselves, if anything. So I think that it was just funny when I would hear that. Like, they would, so much in the press, they're talking about a Black movement and Black Muslims. But like, he's like, you guys are separating us from the rest of the world. We're just standing up and trying to teach and clean up Black folks in the ghettos and the residual effects of slavery, and creating creating all of the hatred amongst people, their Black folks on their own, just because there's so many different shades of Black. You know, you had the house Negroes, as Malcolm X would put it, in the field one, and if you're lighter, you're a better life, and that creates jealousy and division within one's own race. So all these residual effects that are happening still to this day, obviously in the ghettos and in lower communities where you don't let a whole nation of people read for 300 years to learn. There's a lot of catching up to do. So they're all residual effects of what they put in place in this racist society. So I think that my dad knew that, obviously, and he would say that. And people don't want to see themselves, the darkness of themselves sometimes, and have to face that stuff, and because it calls for action, and they don't want change, a lot of them. And the ones that do don't speak up, or they're comfortable, or it's not affecting them directly, or they're not married to a Black man or woman, they don't have mixed children, or for whatever reason they're living their life, they're living it good, and it's not going to help or behoove them to say anything. You have people afraid now to say stuff. I noticed a lot of social media networks, a lot of celebrities just don't say anything at all. They don't want to hurt their following, hurt their brand. So my father is so respected by so many is because he stood up to the mighty government and ended up winning and gave it all up. So because
it's interesting because, like, reading some segments from your book, there's audio recordings of him talking about political things, and he says, I don't know anything about politics, I don't know anything about what's happening with like such and such, but he knows that this is wrong and this is right, and people won't let me go and negotiate for the hostages because they're just afraid, but nobody wants to do what God likes or what Allah likes. So like there's this beauty and like the simplicity of how he approaches things, and like you said, ahead of his time. Like he pushed for his children to have education instead of going into boxing, and like there's parts in it where kind of like the women in the household were respected and were treated like better than himself, I guess. That was his approach. And just like how simple everything was in his mind. Like when it came to politics, he's like, I don't know what's going on, but I know what's right and wrong, and this shouldn't be happening. Exactly. And I don't care if I shouldn't be saying anything about it, but I'm gonna do something about it, like the hostages and Iraq and things like that. Like going out there, putting himself at risk, but he kept it so simple and so human that he managed to achieve what he wanted to achieve, basically. And he does that throughout his life. He achieves these things, but it's in a very simple and very like eloquent way, and a very Muhammad Ali way.
I think I would say.
Yeah, his humanity.
Like, like I was just about to say, and I do want to kind of wrap up. I want to keep talking, but I feel like we've held you for long enough. Okay. But the story about your father going and helping to free the hostages in Iraq, that I can't remember, like 4 or 5 years ago, I came across that story and had never heard it before and thought it was the most incredible thing ever. And we shared like a write-up of that on the Muslim Vibe website, and it was one of our first like big viral stories. Like obviously it wasn't that we broke the story or anything, but just sharing it out there,
right?
And we saw like just thousands and thousands of hits on the piece, and I was mind blown when I first saw the article, like the original. I was like, there's no way this happened, and like no one
knows about it.
No one knows about it.
He opened the lines for communication. The students wouldn't even.
It's unbelievable.
They wouldn't even, but they had such a respect for him. So he said, I'll go over and talk to them. Give them their voice, let them talk, let's get it through peacefully.
He was big in Iraq too. Like Muhammad Ali Clay was huge.
You know that he actually went over and freed hostages and came back with like 12, I think.
Yeah.
So he was always trying.
So I'm gonna put the link in the. I'm gonna shout out the website. I'm gonna put the link in the description to the article that we have about that story. I completely forgot about it until Nora just mentioned it. But it's just an unbelievable story of like what your father was able to achieve whilst also being the world's greatest boxer. And a source of inspiration for literally millions of people.
Well, he used to always say that, like he affected every type of person. Like he would say, I got all I'm so loved and respected. One of his tapes, I could not find it. I was going through them all. It was hard to listen sometimes because my father had passed away while I was writing the book. So I took a long break and I stopped listening to recordings, and the book was too long anyway. It was supposed to be half the length it is, but I thought I have to put this in here. I have to include this. This is my contribution to my father's legacy to show the world just how wonderful he was, his humanity, to hope inspire, to share him with his world that loves and admires him. And even long after I'm gone and can't talk anymore, and be able to give these interviews and express these things, people will be able to read this book. So that was my goal. Yeah. And that's what I wanted to get across. I'm so glad and grateful that all of you, all of my pain and hard work and everything I went through to get this thing done, that you're saying everything that I was hoping. And you know, a lot of the times, like I said, I read the reviews, and so many, 90% of them are all basically what you guys are saying. And that's the most important thing to me, is I wanted people to really, really see his humanity, because that was his greatest accomplishment.
Well, we appreciate you sharing your father with us. It means a lot to all of us. He means a lot to people like me, and it's crazy that, you know, you grew up with him and things like that. So I can't even imagine the Muhammad Ali that maybe behind the book there is more to him. But
let me just tell you, there's more of the same. It's all more of the same stories. It would be redundant. So the one thing I do want to say is that my father loved his religion so much. He loved Muslims. He loved all people, but oh my God, if a Muslim was coming to visit him, and you would think he would act like you would think the person should come and meet Muhammad Ali.
So sweet.
No, I'm not kidding. So especially when they were very wearing hijab and just clean living and praying all the time, he really loved his religion and people and oh my God, like I can't even express it enough. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to share.
That makes me feel emotional.
And oh my God, when we were kids, we used to hide when he would come back from Iran or Saudi Arabia. I guess he would come back so strict, but he loved being around Muslims. He would just sit down and cross his legs and cross his hands and look like a kid, you know, that was in the presence of a queen or queen. I'm not king. I'm not kidding you. He just had such a respect for a faith that he thought was so beautiful and so peaceful, and it broke his heart that it was so misrepresented. And I've seen some beautiful clips of him meeting sheikhs. I can't remember where or when this was, but it's amazing to see your father humbled in that way. Oh God! Like, you know, you would assume that he would be the magnetic ball in the room, but there was a sheikh sat there, and he was giving so much respect towards the sheikh, and like people were like, but you know, you're Muhammad Ali, why are you not? And then he's just literally like, you know, you're my sheikh, basically. You speak, I'm just gonna sit here and be quiet. Right. But it showed, right, that kind of reverence that he had for the faith. It showed in everything that you're saying as well, and obviously all the interviews that everyone's seen, and I think it's such an integral part of his story. Just the fact that like he changed his name from Cassius Clay to Muhammad Ali, and kind of everything that came with it, with Malcolm X, Elijah Muhammad, the whole history, the Nation of Islam, mainstream Islam. Like I think he's, I guess, a nice way for me to kind of tie this up is just to say that, you know, your father played and continues to play like an integral role in the history of Black America, I think. And that's by no means a stretch of the imagination at all. And as you said earlier, the fact that he was able to be, you know, a good-looking, handsome man on TV talking about the beauty of Black people and Black skin and empowering minorities, I guess, across the board, is just such a testament to the fact that he didn't waste any opportunity or his talent in any way whatsoever. You know, he could have just been the greatest boxer who didn't speak. You know, he didn't have to do all these interviews. He didn't have to kind of talk as much as he did. And the boxing can talk for itself. But he, as you say, like he knew he was here for a greater purpose, and he wanted to fulfill that. And he had a lot to say. I don't think you could stop him. And not only that, but he also said, I mean, there's a lot of work to do. He was born Black, and there was too much hell they were catching all over the world. So and then he is a Muslim, and they were catching hell, you know, so he had a huge plate, you know, he's trying to help. He's a non-popular race and a non-popular religion, and he's trying to uplift the race and spread the truth about the religion. So he had an enormous job that he felt, an enormous responsibility. And he
did it, I think, so incredibly well as well.
So I think that, like I said, the fact that he could do it, and he was such a human, just a decent human being, which is what the Islam teaches. You know, he just to love people, to be peace, to give to charity, to be kind to all. You know, he respected all. One of his, as much as he loved his faith and believed 1,000% in his faith, one of his favorite quotes that he always would write in inscriptions and talk about was this. He said, rivers, lakes, and streams all have different names, but they all contain water. So do religions have different names, but they all contain truth expressed in different ways, forms, and times. And his parents were Christian, you know. My mom was Catholic, you know, so he respected all religions. He even though his religion was his choice, and even though he's tried to spread the truth of that. And my dad loved to debate. He loved to sit in a room and debate about religion with his parents.
That definitely comes across.
Oh my God, you have no idea. There's some funny recordings. And he would say, what? How are you going to tell me Jesus is the son of God? You trying to tell me that God takes a shit? God has to go poop? It's like, you can't bring God down to a human level.
Do you plan on releasing any of these recordings? So like funny. I know you've released the prayer one, but do you plan on releasing any more of these recordings?
No, the only recordings, I licensed the recordings out to film, and I released that because it was for the Muslim community, the Islamic community, and that's what my dad would have wanted. So I found a way to do that. I uploaded to DistroKid, and so that's what I want to do. My father would want that, so that's the one that I released in that way. Everything else has been there. There are audios at the end of the audio book version of At Home with Muhammad Ali. I included the audio of my father and I talking when I'm about 4 years old, singing together, and also my favorite recording where he's talking for about 3 or 4 minutes about why he made these tapes. And he's talking directly to me at 3 years old, or not really, I'm laying down beside him, but he's talking to my future self. And he's saying,
I got the audible, so I'm excited to hear that.
Oh my gosh. And let me just tell you right now, the reason I didn't read for the audiobook was because I'm not a professional in that way. And this book is so long, it's 400 plus pages. And and there's so much acting involved. I wanted a professional to do it so that it was easy to listen to, you know? So I chose this woman who had a pleasant voice. Her name is Kim Stoughton. She's, affiliated in the Islamic world as well. And she is just a beautiful, I heard her reading for a book called Kindred that my father and I were listening to a long time ago about a sci-fi kind of thing. We were driving somewhere from Arizona to LA, and it was about a Black woman married to a white man who somehow gets ported back into antebellum South slavery times and some strangeness. And she was going back and forth from the past it's really interesting. And she had a beautiful reading voice. So Kim Stoughton reads for it, and she does an amazing job. You'd be surprised how well she does to be a female acting like Muhammad Ali.
She does his voice.
Right.
She makes her voice deeper.
Right.
When she does his parts.
But let me give you one piece of advice. If you're listening to the audio, we never had a chance to re-record it. She reads a little slow, so if you want to hear it read on like a nicer speed, you just have to push it to 1.25 as far as the speed. Nice. And that puts it at a perfect speed, so it doesn't feel too slow. So it's going to be great.
People do that with this podcast sometimes.
Yeah,
I think I took a bit slow.
But if you actually do it, just that first notch up, I think it's 1.25.
I will.
It actually reads perfectly. It sounds perfect. So
I'll do that.
Yeah, but at the very end, I read the epilogue, and it's very short, just so I have my voice in there somewhere. I read the epilogue, and then the end is, like I said, 5 minutes of audio recording. So they got them that way.
Nice. And
there's also a film At Home, that's my book. I Am Ali. Universal Pictures did a documentary called I Am Ali in 2014, and 12 minutes of recording is spread throughout that hour-and-a-half long film. It seems like a lot more, but you'll also hear the recordings in there too, different recordings.
That's awesome, Hana.
Well, Hana, thank you so much for sharing this all with us. No, it's been amazing. As I said, this is, for me, I would have loved to have obviously met your father and just shook his hand at one point in my life, but obviously that wasn't able to happen. Right. But this is the next best thing for me, being able to talk to you. It's been amazing, just kind of, I guess, reminiscing on everything. And even for it's reminiscing for me as well, like it is for everyone, I think, because we've all been on that journey with your father, with all the Joe Frazier fights and the Thriller in Manila and kind of everything. I feel like that's a part of all of our history, even though it's not. But I do feel like I'm attached to that in some way.
Thank you. We are.
I know this has been great.
And if you want to have questions from your audience, emailed to you. We can do another one where I'm just answering their questions. I don't mind that.
We might have to hold you to that.
No problem at all. Just they can send in your questions, and I'll be happy to come back and do another hour of answering those questions.
That would be awesome. Maybe we can do it like an Instagram live or something.
Yeah, that's fine.
Who knows? All right, awesome. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you guys,
Hana.
both of you. I appreciate it.
It was an honor, Hannah. Thank you
so much. Thank you. I appreciate it.
So, Nora, that was our conversation with Hana. Your initial thoughts?
It was amazing.
Is that
amazing experience. She's so wonderful as well. Like, she's so easy to talk to. She does such a nice job, talking about her. You can see the admiration that she has for her father, basically, and it's nice that it comes through and everything. I can't
remember if it was after we finished recording. It might have been when she was just saying that like her dad gave so much to everybody, and that she felt it was her duty to kind of continue in sharing him and keeping sort of everything about him alive.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really nice. And as you say, like, she does such a wonderful job. I went home. So we're recording this outro like the next day after the interview. And I remember I went home and I was telling my family about like the little stories that she mentioned, like the Christmas story, and how he would write his autograph on pages that had like, Datwa basically.
Yeah.
And it's just such nice little character quirks and things.
Yeah.
Like it was a very
and no one knows that, and you can't find that stuff online, but she's the one who brings that to light. She brings that about him to light, which is really
and she's written various books. I think as I mentioned on the podcast, like she's co-written an autobiography with her dad. So I she's most definitely one of the leading experts in the world when it comes to talking about Muhammad Ali.
Yeah, she really is. And even you didn't ask her, but you didn't ask why she didn't become a boxer. But she does.
I said I was going to, and I didn't.
She does go through it in the book. Like, she could throw a punch when she was younger, but it turned out her sister was much quieter, and she ended up being a boxer. And her dad was a bit reluctant, but in the end, he supported her. And because she was so devout to spreading her dad's, image and message, basically. Yeah. So that's what she does.
Well, thank you for answering on her behalf.
This book is so good, you guys. You have to read it.
But yeah, I think that's everything for another.
It was lovely. Thank you for having me. It was fun.
You. Are you gonna come back, or is it just when we get like the big names?
Yeah, only big names. I was holding out on doing a podcast for a long time until this happened.
You were lucky though, because when I mentioned that we weren't going to be doing video, you were like, "Oh, perfect, I'm in." Even better. But yeah, no, I mean, you're obviously in the office, so feel free to jump on whenever.
Okay, get us some big guests. I'm on.
This is the problem. Everyone just wants big guests, and then anyways. For all my guests that come on the podcast, thank you guys all. I love and respect all of you equally, which is why I am a part of the conversations. But other team members are a bit more rude and a bit more picky when it comes to who they want to speak to. But no, that is a wrap, I guess, for this podcast. Thank you guys for listening. If you enjoyed it, be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. And also, if you're listening on the Apple Podcast app, please do give us a 5-star rating. And that is it.
That's it.
Thank you guys. Take care. Stay safe.